I'm Jane from Poppy Patchwork, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make a block called Martha Washington Star, and this is an 8-inch block. So I've drawn the block out in my Quilt Block Notebook and I've written out all the measurements. In this book you get lots of blank pages, and I find it really useful for calculating the size of my pieces for my block. I've designed this quilt block notebook, which I use when I'm planning out the blocks that I'm going to do videos for, and you may find it useful. You can buy it from Amazon, and if you scan this code using your phone, it'll take you straight to the Amazon page for it. Now, let's get quilting. So for this block, you're going to need, in background fabric, 4 2.5-inch squares and 1 5 3/4 inch square. In fabric A, you're going to need 4 3.25 inch squares. In fabric B, you're going to need 2 3.25 inch squares. In fabric C, you're going to need 1 3.25 inch square. And in fabric D, you're going to need 1 3.25 inch square. This block is made up of flying geese and identical split square triangles. So we're going to start by making the flying geese, and we're going to use the 4 at a time method. So for this, we're going to need the large background square and the background square in fabric A. So the first thing we're going to do is draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of the fabric A fabrics. So I'm going to take 2 of these and place them in opposite corners of the large background fabric square. I'm going to pin them in place. And the diagonal line needs to run across the diagonal of this background square. So I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. So I'm going to remove the pins, and then I'm going to cut along the drawn line. And now I'm going to set and press the seam. So I'm going to set the seam and press towards the smaller triangles. And then I'm going to pin one of the squares in the opposite corner here, so that that drawn line runs from the corner and through these 2 triangle pieces. I'm going to repeat that with the other one. So I'm going to take those to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. I'm going to remove the pins, and then I'm going to cut along the drawn line. And now I'm going to press these. So I'm going to set the seam and then press towards that small triangle. Now we're going to trim the flying geese. Now I like to use this tool, which is the Ultimate Flying Geese tool, designed by Deb Heatherly for Creative Grids. If you do not have one of these, if you right mouse click on the link above, it will take you to my video on how to trim flying geese with a standard ruler. And when you use this method, you're going to need to trim them to 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. So using this tool, trim number 1, we're going to line this apex or point of the triangle along the D markings. And I'm going to trim up one side and along the top. And then I'm going to rotate the unit, rotate the ruler, and trim 2 is again lining the point of the triangle with the D lines on your ruler and trimming up one side and along the top. I'm going to repeat that with all the pieces. So I'm going to put those to one side, and now we're going to do the identical split square triangles. To make identical split square triangles, you're going to need 4 fabrics. We've got 2 in fabric B, and 1 in fabric C, and 1 in fabric D. We're going to place the fabric B's to one side, and on the back of one of your other fabrics, you're going to draw 4 lines. You're going to line the 1/4 inch line of the ruler across the diagonal on the back of your fabric, and then you're going to draw 1/4 inch away along the edge of the ruler. I'm going to twist that around. I'm going to line the 1/4 inch line of the ruler between the 2 corners, and then repeat by drawing another line across the edge of the ruler. So you've now got 2 lines, and they are 1/2 inch apart. I'm now going to repeat that on the other diagonal. So I'm lining the 1/4 inch line in the corners and drawing a line along the ruler edge. I'm now going to turn that round and repeat. So you now have 4 lines on the back of your fabric, and we're going to join that with the other fabric piece. So that's fabric C and D are joined together, and I'm going to pop a pin in here. Now when I take it to the sewing machine, I'm going to sew down the line on the right hand side until I get to the centre, and then going to pivot across, and then I'm going to come down the left hand line. And then I'm going to rotate this unit around and sew down the right hand side to the centre, pivot over to the left hand line and sew down on top of that line. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and do that now. So I'm going to sew down on the right hand side. And I've sewn on top of the line, and I've got to halfway along that line. I'm now going to raise the needle, I'm now going to raise the foot and pivot, and I'm going to sew until I hit the next line. And now I'm going to pivot again, and I'm going to continue sewing down on top of the line on the left hand side. I'm going to remove those pins because they're in the way, and I'm going to repeat the process on the other two sets of lines. So now you should have sewn lines on the back of the fabric that look like this. And now I'm going to cut between those lines along the diagonal in both directions. I'm also going to cut fabric D across the diagonal, just once. So I'm going to take these over to the pressing mat. So I'm going to set the seam, and then I'm going to press it to one side and then press it open. There's a few stitches here from the stitching that we did, so I'm just going to cut these. And now I'm going to place these right sides together with fabric B that we just cut in half across the diagonal. Now fabric B is going to be a little bit bigger, and that's okay. I am going to try and centre it as best I can. going to flip it back to the cutting side. So I'm going to take these back over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So now I'm going to set and press the seams. So I'm going to set and press these seams, and I'm going to press towards the larger triangle. I may change my mind later, but that's what I'm going to do at the moment. And now we're going to trim these to 2.5 inches. So using a standard ruler, you're going to line the diagonal line along that long stitch line, and then this line in the centre needs to line up at 1.25. So the 1.25 line needs to cross over at this diagonal, and then you're going to trim up one side and along the top. Then going to rotate that round, and you're going to repeat, aligning the 45-degree line on the ruler along your stitch line, and the 1.25 of that ruler needs to be at your center point. And we're going to cut up one side and along the top. Now I prefer to use my triangle square up ruler, and for this we're going to leave the piece folded, and I'm going to line the 2.5 inch line of the ruler on the stitch line, and then this line that runs down north to south, I'm going to line that up along the stitch line between the two triangles, and then I'm going to cut up one side and down the other side. So I'm going to repeat that with all of the other 3 pieces. And now we're ready for block layout. So I've laid the pieces out in block layout, and I'm going to start by making this centerpiece in the middle. So I'm going to join these 2 pieces together. I want to make sure that the seams here match up. And then this seam here, they're both going in the same direction. You can, if you want, flip one so that they butt up also. So I'm going to take these to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set the seam and press the seam open. And I'm now going to pin these two together. So you want to get these points matched perfectly. I'm going to use the positioning pin technique. And if you right mouse click on the link above, it will take you to my video on how to do this technique. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set the seam and I'm going to press it open. So I've returned everything to block layout, and now I'm going to sew together in columns. And once again, you can use the positioning pin technique to match up the points here. So I'm going to take these to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set these seams and I'm going to press them towards the flying geese. And I'm also going to press these seams towards the flying geese. So I've laid these back out in block layout, and hopefully the seams are now pressed in opposite directions. So I'm going to start by matching these seams. They should be pressed in opposite directions so that I can nest the seams together. Then I'm going to do this middle one, which will be a positioning point match. the side. And I can do both sides at the same time. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to set the seam and I'm going to press towards the flying geese. So congratulations! You have made the Martha Washington Star Quilt Block. At this stage it measures 8.5 inches, and once it's sewn into a block it will measure 8 inches. I hope you've enjoyed these videos, and thank you very much for all your support by downloading my patterns and buying my books. Bye for now and happy quilting!